Marcus Chen stood in the waiting room and tried not to sweat through his formal jacket. The Galactic Council Station Harmony 7 stretched around him in ways that made his human brain hurt. Curved walls that seemed to exist in more dimensions than they should, and lighting that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. He had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, reading reports and practicing his speech, and learning the names of species he could barely pronounce. Yet now that he was actually here, the reality of it pressed down on him like a physical weight. "You will do fine," Dr. Elisa Ramirez said from beside him, though her own hands were clasped tight enough that her knuckles showed white. She was the linguist, the expert who had spent years studying the Universal Translator and how it worked. And if she was nervous, then Marcus figured he had every right to be terrified. The door opened without a sound, and a being made entirely of crystal formations floated into the room. Ambassador Vexthal was the head of translation services for the entire Galactic Council, and their body chimed softly as they moved, like wind through glass sculptures. "Human delegates," Vexthal said, and the Universal Translator device on Marcus's collar hummed and converted the crystalline tones into perfect English. "The Council is prepared to receive you. However, we have approximately 12 minutes before the formal session begins. Would you care for refreshments, or perhaps a tour of the translation facilities?" Marcus felt some of his tension ease at the casual offer. He had been expecting rigid formality, but Vexthal seemed almost friendly, their crystal facets catching the strange light in what might have been the alien equivalent of a smile. "Yeah, I could eat," Marcus said, then added with a nervous laugh, "But honestly, I'm so nervous I could die. This whole thing is bananas." The Universal Translator on his collar made a sound it definitely should not have made. It was a grinding noise, like gears that had suddenly forgotten how to mesh together, followed by a high-pitched whine that made Marcus wince and grab at the device. Vexthal's crystal body flashed through a rapid series of colors that the translator helpfully informed him meant alarm, confusion, and deep concern, though the words appeared on his display screen rather than being spoken. That was wrong too, Marcus realized. The translator always spoke translations aloud. It never used text displays except for technical errors. The screen on his collar now showed error, paradox detected, contradiction cascade, semantic overflow, attempting resolution. "What did you say?" Vexthal asked, but the translator on their end must have been malfunctioning too, because the question came out as a series of discordant chimes that meant nothing. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, every translator in the station emitted the same grinding noise at once. The sound echoed through the massive station like a chorus of dying machines, and then suddenly, horribly, stopped. The silence that followed was broken by confused voices in hundreds of languages, none of them being translated anymore. Through the open doorway, Marcus could see into the main council chamber, where representatives from 847 species had been preparing for the session. Now, they were all speaking at once and understanding nothing, gesturing frantically at their translator devices and at each other, and the confusion was spreading like ripples in a pond. A being that looked like a floating jellyfish with too many tentacles drifted past the door, its bioluminescent patterns flashing in what was clearly distress. A creature made of what appeared to be living stone was trying to communicate with a species that resembled a ball of electricity, both of them shouting in their own languages and comprehending nothing. "Oh no," Elisa whispered beside Marcus. "Oh no, no, no. The entire network just crashed." Vexthal's crystal form had gone completely dark, which apparently meant shock so profound that even color was beyond them. Then slowly, individual facets began to glow red, and the translator screen on Marcus's collar managed to display one last message before it died completely. Critical error. Species isolation protocols activated. The station's emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a harsh blue glow that made the chaos in the council chamber look even more nightmarish. Captain Zur of the Krell Dominion, a species that looked like an upright crocodile wearing power armor, was bellowing something that the dead translators could not convert, while other species scattered or huddled in confused groups. Marcus watched in growing horror as the reality of what had happened sank in. The Universal Translator was the foundation of galactic civilization, the one technology that made cooperation between wildly different species possible, and it had been working flawlessly for 12,000 years. 12,000 years without a single major failure, and now it had crashed completely within 30 seconds of him speaking casually. Security drones began flooding into the chamber, their forms sleek and efficient, as they tried to establish order among species that could no longer understand their commands. Ambassador Vexthal finally moved, their crystal body pulsing back through the color spectrum towards something that might have been composure. They looked at Marcus with what he desperately hoped was not anger, but could not tell for certain without the translator. And then they reached out with one crystalline appendage and pointed directly at him. The gesture was universal enough that Marcus understood it perfectly. He was being identified as the source of the problem, which was fair because he absolutely was the source of the problem, though he had no idea what he had actually done wrong. Vexthal's body flashed through a rapid sequence of colors, and then they turned and glided toward the council chamber, leaving Marcus and Eliza standing in the waiting room, surrounded by the sound of hundreds of species trying desperately to communicate. "What did I do?" Marcus asked, though he knew Eliza could not answer without the translator. She was already pulling out her personal tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she tried to access backup systems or emergency protocols or anything that might help. The door to the council chambers slid closed and muffled the worst of the chaos, leaving them in relative quiet. Marcus looked down at his dead translator and then at the closed door, at Eliza, who had gone very pale. Through the small window in the door, he could see Vexthal at the center of the chamber, surrounded by confused and frightened aliens. And even without understanding the language, Marcus knew exactly what the Crystal Ambassador was trying to communicate to the assembled council. Something about the humans was fundamentally, terribly wrong. The emergency lockdown protocols had divided the station into isolated sections, and Marcus found himself in a conference room with Elisa, 3 Krell engineers, a blob-like creature that communicated through color changes, and Ambassador Vexthal, who had not stopped glowing an angry red since the translator collapse. Without functioning translators, communication had devolved into gesture and pantomime and increasingly frustrated attempts at drawing. One of the Krell engineers had pulled up a holographic display that showed the Universal Translator Network as a vast web of connections, and every single node was flashing error red. Marcus watched as the engineer manipulated controls and brought up what looked like diagnostic data. Though without translation, he could only guess at what the flowing alien script meant. Elisa had managed to get her personal tablet connected to an emergency text-only translation system, something that used simple word-to-word conversion without any of the sophisticated processing of the main network, and she was frantically typing messages to Vexthal. The Crystal Ambassador's response came back in choppy, barely coherent English. Human speech caused cascade failure. Translator entered infinite processing loop, attempting to parse contradictory statements. System unable to resolve. Network shut down to prevent core damage. Marcus leaned over Elisa's shoulder to read the message and felt his stomach drop. "What contradictory statements?" Elisa typed back. The response took longer this time, as if Vexthal was consulting with the engineers. Human Marcus stated, "I could eat," then stated, "I could die," then referred to situation as bananas. Translator attempted to process potential consumption action while simultaneously declaring imminent death, while also claiming environmental transformation to fruit. Logical contradiction, semantic overflow, catastrophic error. The screen, and then at Elisa, who had her hand over her mouth. "Oh my God," she typed. The translator interpreted everything literally. "Correct. All galactic languages communicate literally. Precision in communication is fundamental to civilization." Elisa's fingers flew across the keyboard. Human language uses idioms, metaphors, hyperbole, and contextual meaning. "I could eat" means I am somewhat hungry, but it is not urgent. "I could die" is an exaggeration, meaning I am very nervous. "Bananas" in this context means absurd or crazy, not the actual fruit. The pause that followed was longer than any before it. Finally, Vexthal's response appeared. "Humans communicate using intentional imprecision. This seems highly inefficient and potentially dangerous." "It is how our species evolved language," Elisa typed. "We use context and tone and shared cultural understanding to determine meaning. The same words can mean different things in different situations." "That is horrifying." Marcus almost laughed at that, though the situation was far too serious for actual humor. Around them, the Krell engineers were working frantically on the holographic display, and one of them noticed Marcus watching and made a series of gestures that clearly meant, "You, human, you broke this." The engineer then pointed at the display, where Marcus could see what looked like a recording of his voice, the waveform frozen mid-word. They zoomed in, and Marcus saw something he had never expected to see. The audio waveform was surrounded by thousands of branching paths, each one apparently representing a different possible interpretation of what he had said. The engineer pointed at one branch, then another, then swept their clawed hand across the entire tangled mess. The gesture universal. Too many. Impossible to process. "How does the translator usually work?" Marcus asked Elisa, who typed the question to the screen. Tal. Universal Translator analyzes speech patterns, compares to database of all known languages, identifies correct species and dialect, applies direct conversion to target language. Process takes 0.003 seconds per statement. Accuracy 99.97% across all 847 member species. What happened with human speech? Translator identified language as human English. Attempted direct conversion, encountered first contradiction. "I could eat." Conditional statement about future action, but no clear commitment. Attempted resolution, encountered second contradiction. "I could die." Clear statement of mortality, but speaker showed no signs of distress or injury. Attempted resolution. Encountered third contradiction. Bananas, fruit reference in non-food context. Attempted resolution. Processing loop formed. System began checking every possible meaning. Found 847 potential interpretations. Confidence level for each below minimum threshold. Continued searching. Expanded to include entire human language database. Discovered sarcasm, irony, metaphor, simile, hyperbole, understatement, double meaning, implied meaning, contextual variation, emotional subtext. The list continued scrolling down the screen, and Marcus felt increasingly guilty with each entry. System overwhelmed, network bandwidth exceeded, cascade failure, all translators shut down to prevent damage to core linguistic databases. Elisa was already typing again. "How do we fix this?" "Unknown. Backup translators attempted. All failed when processing recorded human speech. Current theory, human language too complex for universal translator architecture. May need complete system redesign." That statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus thought about the chaos in the council chamber, 847 species unable to understand each other, and realized the magnitude of what had happened. Function without translation, and humanity had just destroyed the one thing that made galactic civilization possible. "This is bad," Elisa said aloud, not bothering to type. Marcus nodded and watched as the Krell engineers pulled up more diagnostic data. One screen showed what looked like a linguistic analysis of human conversation. And even without understanding the alien notation, Marcus could see the problem. Human speech was represented as an impossibly tangled web of interconnected meanings, while every other species showed as clean, linear progressions. Another screen displayed a comparison that needed no translation. A simple statement in Krell showed one meaning. A simple statement in the crystalline language showed one meaning. But a simple human statement showed dozens of branching possibilities. The blood creature, which had been pulsing through various colors, suddenly flashed bright orange and made a sound like a wet cough. Its translator device, dead like all the others, could not convert whatever it had said, but the tone was clear enough. Accusation. Vexthal's crystals dimmed slightly, and they typed another message. Emergency council session in 2 hours. All species representatives required to attend. Translation will be provided via text-only emergency system. Agenda. Human participation in Galactic Council. Motion to declare humans linguistic hazard. Motion to suspend human observer status. Motion to quarantine human homeworld until translation solution found. Marcus read the words and felt something cold settle in his chest. Humanity had waited 50 years for this opportunity, had proven themselves worthy through science and diplomacy and cultural exchange, and he had destroyed it all in 3 sentences. "We need to fix this," he said. Elisa looked at him with an expression that mixed sympathy with resignation. "Marcus, I do not think we can. The Universal Translator is 12,000 years of development. It is the most sophisticated piece of technology in known space, and it cannot handle how humans talk." "Then we need to show them why humans talk this way," Marcus said. "There has to be a reason our language evolved like this. Something that makes it valuable despite the complexity." Elisa was quiet for a moment, then began typing furiously. "Ambassador, request permission to present analysis of human linguistic evolution to emergency council session. Believe we can demonstrate value of human communication methods." Vexthal's response was immediate. "Permission granted. However, be warned. Many species now view humans as threat to galactic stability. Your presentation will determine whether humanity remains in contact with galactic community or is isolated indefinitely." Marcus looked at the dead translator on his collar, and then at Elisa, who was already pulling up research files on her tablet. The galaxy, and they could not even speak clearly enough to be understood by the technology that was supposed to make communication possible. The irony was not lost on Marcus, though he suspected explaining irony to the council would only make things worse. The emergency council chamber had been reconfigured with individual screens at each delegation's position, so that the primitive text-only translator could provide some minimal communication. Though watching 847 species trying to conduct diplomacy through choppy word-by-word conversion was like watching civilization move in slow motion. Marcus stood at the presentation podium with Elisa beside him, her tablet connected to the main display system, and tried not to think about how the last time he had spoken in this room, he had crashed galactic civilization. Ambassador Vexthal's crystal form occupied the central moderator position, and their body glowed a neutral blue that apparently meant they were willing to listen, though Marcus had learned that crystal color language included at least 400 distinct shades, and he probably could not tell encouragement from barely restrained fury. The text translator rendered Vexthal's opening. "Human delegates now present explanation for linguistic catastrophe. Council will hear evidence before voting on quarantine measures." Elisa touched her tablet, and the main display lit up with a comparative linguistic analysis. "Thank you, Ambassador," she began, speaking slowly to give the text system time to process. "What we need to understand is that human language did not evolve the same way as other galactic languages." The display showed a branching tree diagram. On one side were the 847 known galactic species, their languages all developing along similar paths toward what the chart labeled as optimal information transfer. On the other side, alone, was humanity. Every species in the Galactic Council evolved language as a tool for sharing information accurately. Elisa continued, "Your languages are beautiful in their precision, but human language evolved to serve multiple purposes simultaneously." New chart that showed human linguistic development over millennia. Humans evolved language not just for information transfer, but for social bonding, emotional expression, artistic creation, humor, persuasion, deception, philosophy, and abstract thought. Our brains developed to handle multiple layers of meaning at once. A Krell delegate's text appeared on the screen. Deception. Humans admit language designed for lies. Marcus winced, but Elisa had expected this. Not lies exactly, she said. Humans developed the ability to communicate on multiple levels because our species is highly social. We needed to navigate complex group dynamics, form alliances, detect threats, and build cultures. Precision was less important than flexibility. She pulled up an example, the simple phrase, "That is interesting." In most galactic languages, this phrase means exactly what it says. The subject holds interest for the speaker. But in human communication, this phrase can mean genuine interest, polite acknowledgement, sarcasm indicating lack of interest, disagreement expressed diplomatically, buying time to think, or changing the subject tactfully. The display showed all 6 interpretations, branching from the same 3 words. How do humans know which meaning? A text message appeared from a species Marcus did not recognize. Context, Elisa said. Tone of voice, facial expression, body language, relationship between speakers, recent conversation history, cultural background, current situation, and dozens of other factors. Human children spend years learning to read these contextual clues. She brought up more examples, and Marcus watched the council delegates processing this information through their screens. The phrase, "I am fine" can mean, "I am actually fine," "I am not fine but do not wish to discuss it," "I am angry at you," "I am sad but hiding it," "I am fine now but was not earlier," or "I am definitely not fine, and you should know why." A series of text messages flooded the screens, too many for Marcus to read, but the tone seemed to shift from accusation towards something that might have been confused fascination. Vexthal's message appeared. "This seems impossibly inefficient. How do humans communicate anything accurately?" "We are very good at reading context," Marcus said, taking over from Elisa. "Human brains evolved to process social information incredibly quickly. We can detect micro-expressions that last a tenth of a second. We hear tonal variations that convey emotional state. We remember entire conversation histories and factor them into current understanding." He had Elisa pull up a video recording of 2 humans having a conversation, and played it with English subtitles for the council. The 2 humans spoke casually, using slang and idioms and sarcasm, and Marcus watched the alien delegates try to follow along through their text translators. "Makes no sense, correct?" Marcus said. One human says, "I am dead," but is clearly alive. The other says, "That is sick," about something they obviously enjoy, but watch their faces and body language. The video replayed in slow motion, and Marcus pointed out the smiles, the relaxed postures, the shared laughter. These contextual clues tell the real story. Humans are not confused by this conversation because we are processing both the words and everything around the words simultaneously. Elisa brought up the next section of their presentation, a comparison of linguistic complexity. The Universal Translator analyzes approximately 12 variables when processing galactic languages: syntax, phonetics, grammar structure, vocabulary, and similar technical factors. But human language requires analyzing over 200 variables to determine accurate meaning. The number appeared on the main display, 200 plus. Text messages cascaded across the screens. Could feel the shock rippling through the chamber. These include literal meaning, implied meaning, emotional subtext, cultural references, historical context, relationship dynamics, power structures, humor markers, sarcasm indicators, metaphorical layers, idiomatic usage, regional variations, generational differences, professional jargon, social class markers, gender communication patterns, and many more. A geometric shape that might have been a species representative pulsed its text message onto the screen. No species could evolve to handle such complexity. Humans did, Elisa said firmly. Our brains dedicate enormous processing power to language and social understanding. What seems impossible to the universal translator is automatic for a human child by age 6. She pulled up brain scans comparing human and alien neural activity during communication. Notice how human language processing activates not just language centers, but also emotional processing, memory systems, social cognition networks, and pattern recognition areas. We use a significant portion of our brain just to have a conversation. Marcus watched the council absorb this and decided to demonstrate. Let me show you something, he said. I am going to say the same sentence 3 times with different meanings. He took a breath and spoke clearly. That is great. He said it first with genuine enthusiasm, and the text translator rendered it simply as, that is great. He said it again with flat sarcasm, and the translator gave the same output. That is great. He said it a third time with sympathetic concern, and again, that is great. The words are identical, Marcus explained, but every human in this room would understand 3 completely different meanings based purely on how I said them. The universal translator cannot detect this because it was never designed to process emotional content. Vextal's crystal form shifted through several colors before their text appeared. Human linguistic complexity is biological adaptation, not choice. Elisa confirmed, we cannot turn this off. It is how our brains are wired. Asking humans to communicate with pure literal precision would be like asking crystalline species to stop refracting light, or asking Krell to ignore scent markers. Another chart appeared showing human communication evolution. As humans developed agriculture and cities in complex societies, our language evolved to handle increasingly subtle social interactions. We needed to communicate disagreement without causing conflict, express emotions while maintaining social bonds, share abstract concepts, and coordinate large groups. Literal language alone could not do this. The blob creature from earlier flashed a color pattern, and its text message appeared. If human language so advanced, why unable to make translator work? It was a fair question, and Marcus saw several other delegates expressing similar sentiments. Because the universal translator was designed for galactic standard communication, Elisa answered, it is perfect for what it does, converting precise literal statements between species that all communicate precisely and literally. But humans are the first species it has encountered that evolved a fundamentally different approach to language. She brought up the final section of their presentation. We are not saying human language is better. We are saying it is different, and that difference has value. The screen showed examples. Human poetry that used metaphor and imagery to convey emotions impossible to express literally. Diplomatic correspondence that navigated sensitive political situations through careful word choice and implied meanings. Scientific papers that built complex arguments through layered reasoning. And art that communicated across cultural boundaries through shared human experience. Human language allows us to be creative, diplomatic, emotionally expressive, and philosophically sophisticated, Marcus said. Yes, it is complex and sometimes ambiguous, but that complexity lets us do things that pure literal communication cannot. Vextal's form pulsed through a sequence of colors that might have meant consideration. Their text message took longer than usual to appear. Council must consider if human linguistic complexity is a positive or threat to galactic stability. Recess for deliberation. Marcus and Elisa were escorted back to the waiting area, while the council debated humanity's fate, through painfully slow text translation. Do you think they understood? Marcus asked. Elisa looked exhausted. I think we showed them that humans are not deliberately being difficult, she said. Whether they see that as a good thing or a reason to quarantine us, I honestly do not know. The council deliberations stretched across 3 days, and during that time the station transformed into something Marcus barely recognized. With the Universal Translator network still crashed, species had begun self-segregating into linguistic groups where at least some communication was possible through gesture or the primitive text system. And the once unified station now felt like 800 separate islands floating in confused isolation. Marcus spent most of the first day being interrogated by various delegations who wanted to understand human language better. Though interrogated might have been too strong a word, given that most of the sessions devolved into mutual bewilderment. The Krell military delegation was particularly intense. Captain Zur had brought 3 other officers, and they surrounded Marcus in a small conference room with their text tablets, firing questions faster than the translation system could process. Deception appeared on the screen. Yes, Marcus admitted, humans can lie, but most species can lie. We just have more ways to do it. If enemy cannot understand human communication patterns, this provides tactical advantage. Marcus had not considered this angle and felt uncomfortable with where it was going. I suppose that is true, but Krell Dominion wishes to hire human communication specialists for Military Intelligence Division. Will pay substantial compensation. Before Marcus could respond, Elisa burst into the room with her tablet showing an urgent message. The Merchant Coalition just offered us exclusive contracts worth billions, she said. They want human consultants to help negotiate trade deals because they think our ability to read emotional subtext gives us an advantage. Over the next few hours, similar offers flooded in from a dozen different factions. The Scientific Assembly wanted humans to help analyze communication from the few species that had resisted joining the council, suggesting that maybe those species had complex languages that standard translation had failed to properly process. A group of what appeared to be artists and philosophers wanted to study human metaphor and poetry. 3 different megacorporations wanted to patent human communication training programs. This is getting out of control, Marcus said as he and Elisa reviewed the offers in their temporary quarters. It gets worse. Elisa pulled up another message. The isolationist bloc is pushing for an emergency vote to ban all human participation in council affairs. They are arguing that human linguistic complexity is a threat to stable communication, and therefore a threat to peace. The text of their formal complaint was harsh. Humans were described as semantic hazards, whose very presence destabilized the carefully constructed linguistic framework that had enabled 12,000 years of galactic cooperation. Meanwhile, Elisa continued, Ambassador Vexthal has been leading a team of engineers trying to rebuild the Universal Translator. They have been working non-stop and just sent us this. She showed Marcus a schematic of what looked like the current translator, except it was at least 10 times more complex, with entire new processing modules branching off the main system. The attached message from Vexthal read, Attempting to create human-compatible translation system. Requires fundamental architecture redesign. Estimated completion time, unknown. Marcus felt guilty looking at the schematic, knowing that brilliant engineers were having to rebuild something that had worked perfectly for 12 millennia, just because humans talked in complicated ways. We should help, he said. That evening, Marcus and Elisa found themselves in the engineering bay with Vexthal and a team of 24 specialists from various species, trying to make a translator that could handle human communication. The room was a chaos of holographic displays and animated discussions conducted through the frustratingly slow text system, and Marcus quickly realized that watching brilliant minds work at 1/10 their normal speed because they could not properly communicate with each other was heartbreaking. The fundamental problem, Vexthal's text message appeared, is that the universal translator assumes single correct meaning per statement. Human language requires probability distribution across multiple possible meanings. An engineer from a species that looked like a collection of floating geometric shapes added their contribution. Suggest implementing confidence scoring system. Translator could provide multiple interpretations with likelihood percentages. That might work, Elisa typed quickly. Humans often operate with ambiguity. We are comfortable with probably means this, rather than definitely means this. Another engineer, this one from a species with too many arms, brought up a new concern. Human communication requires emotional analysis. Current translator has no emotional processing capability. Could we add it? Marcus typed. Would require entirely new neural network architecture, plus database of human emotional expressions, plus real-time analysis of vocal patterns, facial movements, body language. The list kept growing, and Marcus watched the scope of the project expand from a simple fix to a complete reinvention of galactic communication technology. There is something else, Elisa said, typing carefully. Human children take years to learn their own language. We spend our entire childhood developing the ability to understand context and subtext. Maybe we are approaching this wrong by trying to make the translator smart enough to handle human complexity instantly. Vexthal's crystal form flickered through several. Marcus tried to explain. It is a form of humor or emphasis, like if something goes wrong, and a human says, "Well, that is just perfect," they mean it is definitely not perfect. This makes no sense. Okay, different example, Marcus continued. If a human says, "I am fine" in a short clipped tone, they usually mean they are not fine. Another volunteer asked, "Then why not say, 'I am not fine'?" Elisa jumped in. Because humans use indirect communication to avoid conflict, or because we expect the other person to care enough to notice we are upset, or sometimes because we want to talk about it but need the other person to ask more questions first. The training room erupted in confused text messages. One volunteer, a floating jellyfish creature, simply floated out of the room and did not return. The second attempt went slightly better when they tried teaching the concept of idioms. When humans say they will get coffee with someone, they do not necessarily want coffee, Marcus explained. They mean they want to spend time talking with that person. So humans lie about beverage preferences? No, it is just a social phrase. The actual beverage does not matter. Then why mention coffee at all? Marcus looked at Elisa helplessly, and she took over. Human communication is as much about social bonding as information transfer, she said. The offer to get coffee signals willingness to be friendly and spend time together. The literal coffee is just a comfortable excuse for the interaction. By the third training session, something interesting happened. A Krell soldier who had been attending quietly raised their clawed hand and typed a message. I understand. In Krell culture, we have scent markers that convey emotional state beneath verbal communication. Perhaps human language is like adding scent markers to words. Marcus felt something click into place. Enthusiastically. Exactly like that. Humans layer emotional and contextual information onto the literal words. The Krell soldier continued, other species communicate literally like reading text. Humans communicate like text, plus scent, plus color, plus body language all at once. This is why Translator cannot handle it. Too many simultaneous information streams. Vexthal, who had been observing the session, pulsed bright white, which apparently meant excitement. This explains everything. Translator must not just translate words, but also translate emotional layer, contextual layer, relational layer. The engineering team seized on this insight, and within hours had redesigned their approach. Instead of trying to make one super intelligent translator, they would create a modular system where different components handled different aspects of human communication. Marcus watched the prototype take shape over the following days. A main translation module for literal words, an emotional analysis module for tone and affect, a contextual module for situational meaning, and a cultural database for idioms and references. It was massive and complex, and required significant processing power. But the early tests were promising. When Marcus said "I could eat" into the prototype, instead of crashing, it displayed "Speaker expresses mild hunger, confidence 78%, no immediate need for food, confidence 82%, possibly being polite, confidence 45%. It is not perfect, Vexthal's message appeared, but it is functional. The emergency council session was reconvened to review the progress. Marcus stood before the assembled delegates and demonstrated the new translator system, speaking naturally while the device provided translations with confidence ratings and contextual notes. "This is pretty cool," he said, and the translator displayed "Speaker expresses positive opinion, confidence 91%, uses casual register, indicating comfort, confidence 87%. Word cool means good, not cold, confidence 95%. The council watched in what Marcus hoped was impressed silence. Then Captain Zer's text message appeared on the main screen. Request permission to purchase human communication training programs for Krell Diplomatic Corps. The floodgates opened, and similar requests poured in from dozens of species. Humanity had not just fixed the translator. They had revealed an entire dimension of communication that the galaxy had never fully explored. The official activation ceremony for Universal Translator version 2.0 took place exactly 30 days after Marcus Chen had accidentally crashed galactic civilization with 3 casual sentences. The main council chamber had been restored to its full grandeur, and every delegation was present, their new translator devices gleaming at their positions. And Marcus stood at the speaker's podium, trying to ignore how similar this felt to the last time he had been here. "Testing, testing," he said into the microphone, and watched as 847 species received the translation. Speaker performing audio check. Confidence 99%. Repetition indicates testing procedure. Confidence 97%. Not poetry, Marcus thought, but at least it worked. Ambassador Vexthal's crystal form occupied the central position, and they spoke in their chiming language, which Marcus's new translator converted to "The Council recognizes human representative Marcus Chen, confidence 100%, who will now deliver his address that was interrupted 30 days ago. Confidence 95%. Note reference to previous incident." Marcus took a deep breath and began. "Honored members of the Galactic Council, I stand before you today both apologetic and grateful," he said, speaking naturally instead of the careful measured tones he had practiced. The translators hummed and provided real-time conversion with probability indicators and contextual notes, and Marcus saw species checking their displays to understand the nuances. "I am sorry that my casual speech caused such disruption," Marcus continued, "but I am grateful for what we learned together in the aftermath." His translator noted the emotional subtext: apologetic tone, confidence 94%, sincere gratitude, confidence 89%, and Marcus saw several species registering this information. For 12,000 years, the Universal Translator enabled communication by assuming all species shared a common approach to language. Precision, clarity, literal meaning, Marcus said. This was brilliant engineering, and it worked perfectly. But humans communicate differently. He paused and chose his next words carefully. "We humans are messy communicators. We imply things we do not say directly. We use emotion as part of our message. We reference shared cultural knowledge. We speak in layers," Marcus explained. "This is not better or worse than galactic standard communication. It is simply different." Vexthal's translation device added contextual notes about human cultural values of individuality and diversity. "What the last 30 days taught us is that difference has value," Marcus continued. "Human linguistic complexity forced this council to examine assumptions about communication that had not been questioned in millennia." He gestured to the translator devices around the chamber. These new translators do more than just handle human speech. They have made all galactic communication richer, Marcus said. They can detect emotional content in any species communication. They can flag contextual nuances. They can identify when meaning might be ambiguous. A text message appeared on the main display from a species Marcus had not interacted with before. New translator detected stress patterns in my delegation's earlier statements that we did not realize we were broadcasting. This is useful information. Other species began sharing similar observations, and Marcus saw the tide of opinion shifting. The Council faces complex challenges, Marcus said. Trade negotiations, territorial disputes, cultural misunderstandings, philosophical disagreements. These require more than just accurate word-for-word translation. They require understanding the emotions and contexts and relationships beneath the words. Elisa was sitting in the human delegation section and gave him an encouraging nod. Humans have spent hundreds of thousands of years developing the ability to read these subtle signals, Marcus explained. It is what we are good at, not because we are special, but because our survival depended on navigating complex social dynamics. He pulled up a display showing the training programs that had been developed. We offer this skill to the Council, Marcus said. Human communication specialists are ready to help with diplomatic negotiations, to teach contextual analysis, to assist in situations where understanding emotional subtext matters. Captain Zer's delegation flashed a message. Krell Dominion has already begun implementing human communication training in diplomatic corps. Early results show significant improvement in negotiation outcomes. The Merchant Coalition added their own testimony. Human consultants helped us identify emotional hesitation in trade partners' communications that literal translation missed, led to successful renegotiation. Species shared their experiences, and Marcus felt the chamber's atmosphere shift from skepticism to something approaching enthusiasm. Vexthal spoke again, and their translator provided. The Council acknowledges human contributions to improving galactic communication. Confidence, 100%. However, concern remains about integration of species with fundamentally different linguistic approach. Confidence, 73%. Note, diplomatic understatement of serious concern. Marcus nodded, appreciating the honesty. I understand the concern, he said. Humans will always communicate in complex ways, because that is how our brains work. But we can learn to be more aware of it. We can flag when we are using idioms or sarcasm. We can explain our contextual meanings. He gestured to Elisa, who joined him at the podium. Dr. Ramirez has been working with the Translation Services Division to create protocols for human galactic communication, Marcus said. These will help both sides understand each other better. Elisa took over smoothly. The protocols include guidelines for humans to be more explicit about their meanings when speaking with other species, and training for other species to recognize common human communication patterns. It is a two-way bridge. She pulled up examples on the display. A human saying, "That is interesting," with a note explaining how to identify which meaning was intended. A guide to recognizing sarcasm through vocal patterns. A database of common idioms with literal translations and actual meanings. We are not asking the galaxy to become human in communication style, Elisa said. We are offering tools to understand when humans are being human. The blob creature that had been so hostile during the initial crisis now pulsed a friendly orange and sent a message. Appreciate human transparency about communication challenges. Propose formal recognition of linguistic diversity as galactic value. Cascade of supporting messages, and Marcus watched as the Council began drafting a resolution in real time. The final vote came through with overwhelming majority. Humanity was granted full Council membership with a special designation as linguistic specialists. The role came with both privileges and responsibilities. Humans would serve as consultants on complex communication challenges, provide training in contextual analysis, and assist with first contact situations where standard translation might miss important nuances. In exchange, humans agreed to undergo communication training themselves to better understand galactic standard approaches and to always use the enhanced translators in official council business. There is one more thing, Vexthal said, their crystal form pulsing through a rainbow of colors that the translator helpfully noted meant pleased anticipation, mixed with pride. The main display lit up with a new feature of the translator system. A toggle switch labeled Human Mode. We have made human-style communication available as an option for all species, Vexthal explained. Any species can now choose to add emotional layers, use metaphors, or communicate with intentional ambiguity. Marcus stared at the display in surprise. You built human communication features into the Galactic Standard Translator, he said. Correct, Vexthal confirmed. Initial testing shows that approximately 23% of galactic species have begun experimenting with metaphorical language. 14% have adopted emotional subtext in their communications, and there is particular interest in sarcasm among younger members of several species. Elisa laughed, and Marcus joined her. The absurdity of the galaxy learning sarcasm from humans hitting both of them at once. We did not just fix the translator, Marcus said. We changed how the galaxy thinks about communication. You showed us that precision is not the only virtue. Vexthal replied, sometimes ambiguity allows for creativity. Emotional expression enables deeper connection, and complexity creates richness. The crystalline ambassador floated closer to Marcus. I must confess something, Vexthal said, and the translator noted a shift to more personal register. When the universal translator first crashed, I was angry. I believed humans had damaged something perfect. Marcus remembered the angry red glow and nodded. But working with your species these past 30 days has been fascinating, Vexthal continued. Human language is like crystalline light refraction. One concept enters and emerges as a spectrum of meanings. It is not broken. It is simply more complex than we had encountered before. Thank you, Marcus said, and meant it. The formal session concluded, and delegates began mingling, many approaching the human delegation to ask about training programs or to share their experiences with the new translators. Marcus found himself in conversation with a young Krell who was enthusiastically explaining how they had used metaphorical language in a recent report, and their supervisor had been both confused and impressed. I told them the negotiations were walking on thin ice, and they actually checked environmental scans before they understood I meant the situation was precarious, the Krell said through their translator, which helpfully flagged this as an idiom. That is perfect, Marcus said. You are getting it. Elisa was surrounded by a group of species representatives who wanted to establish formal human communication training programs for their governments, and she was typing furiously on her tablet, trying to keep track of all the requests. Later that evening, after the official ceremonies had ended and most delegates had departed, Marcus stood in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The station hummed around him with the sound of 847 species communicating clearly once again, though now with added layers of emotional context and cultural nuance that had never been present before. Vexthal found him there, their crystal form refracting the starlight into dancing patterns. What are you thinking? The ambassador asked, and Marcus noted how the question itself felt different now, more open to multiple types of answers. I am thinking about how one casual sentence changed everything, Marcus said, and about how sometimes breaking something is the first step to making it better. Profound human wisdom, Vexthal said, and Marcus's translator noted, possible sarcasm, confidence 45%, possible sincerity, confidence 45%, possible both simultaneously, confidence 30%. Marcus looked at his translator display and smiled. "Are you being sarcastic?" he asked. Vexthal's crystal body flickered through a complex pattern that might have been the crystalline equivalent of a smile. "I am learning," they said, "though I must admit, the ambiguity is both terrifying and exhilarating." "Welcome to human communication," Marcus said, "where nothing means exactly what it says, and somehow we all understand each other anyway." They stood together in comfortable silence, which Marcus's translator helpfully noted as meaningful shared moment. No verbal communication required, confidence 87%. Humanity had not just joined the Galactic Council, they had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about language and meaning and connection. And it had all started because Marcus Chen had casually mentioned that he could eat, that he was nervous enough to die, and that the whole thing was completely bananas. The translator hummed quietly and provided one final translation. Human satisfaction with outcome, confidence 94%, appreciation for irony, confidence 89%, sense of accomplishment, confidence 91%. Decided not to correct it, because for once, the literal translation was exactly right.